Barron Trump stared at the heavy oak door at the end of a long, plush hallway. On the door's paneling, intricate carvings told stories of old alliances forged and broken. The building itself was an imposing mansion set behind wrought iron gates, an emblem of power that very few were ever invited to enter. Tonight, the hallways were hushed, the usual bustle of staff absent, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps and the soft glow of wall sconces to accompany him. He carried no entourage, only his longtime confidant Lyle walked at his side. In the stillness, Barron could almost hear his own pulse, a quiet tension building with every step. He was about to enter a private gathering of some of the most influential figures in government, business, and media. What would happen behind that door could shape the direction of entire industries, if he navigated it properly. He paused a moment to collect himself. Over the years, Barron had earned a reputation as a calm, calculating presence in rooms where deals were struck and fates decided. His quietness often made others underestimate him, believing that a man of such restraint could not possibly steer the outcomes of large-scale negotiations. Yet time and time again, he proved them wrong by carefully orchestrating solutions without resorting to bluster or intimidation. Tonight's meeting would test those skills more than ever. Rumor had it that the gathering was orchestrated by an informal circle sometimes called the Titans, an exclusive group of power brokers who prided themselves on guiding entire economies behind closed doors. They summoned barons of industry, influential politicians, and cultural gatekeepers to hash out pacts that never saw the light of day. Publicly, the Titans denied their own existence, dismissing the notion of a secret cabal. But privately, those who walked these halls knew the truth. Lyle, looking a shade more formal than usual, gave Barron a glance that silently asked, "Are you ready?" Barron responded with a calm nod. He pressed forward and gently turned the brass handle. Inside, a high-ceilinged salon awaited. The walls were lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes on politics, finance, and obscure historical treatises. In the center stood a wide table, its polished surface reflecting the chandelier's light. Around it sat a handful of individuals in hushed conversation, each with the bearing of someone used to controlling vast resources or shaping public narratives. Barron recognized some from fleeting encounters: a media mogul known for shaping entire election cycles with editorial choices, a banking executive rumored to have orchestrated buyouts that reshaped global commerce, an older senator whose whispered support could make or break legislation in Washington. They turned as he entered, their chatter pausing momentarily. "Ah, Mr. Trump," said the media mogul with a hint of a condescending smile. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd decided not to grace us with your presence." Barron offered a polite bow of his head. "I apologize if I've kept you waiting. I prefer to arrive precisely when I'm meant to." His tone was cordial, without brashness or excessive apology. Lyle quietly took a seat near the room's edge, while Barron approached the table. The senator, an older woman with a sharp gaze, gestured to an empty chair. "Sit, Barron. We have matters of consequence to discuss." They wasted little time. Once Barron was seated, a man wearing the crisp suit of a finance magnate cleared his throat. "We're dealing with issues that affect global supply chains, currency fluctuations, and potential market instabilities. We've summoned key players from different sectors to see if we can coordinate certain adjustments." He spoke with the detached confidence of someone used to running the show. The media mogul followed. "There's also a cultural dimension. Public sentiment is shifting in ways that could disrupt entire industries. We'd prefer to manage that shift smoothly, rather than face chaotic upheaval. And that might require controlling certain narratives." Barron listened, his eyes steady, voice silent. He could already sense the shape of what they wanted. The Titans sought to manage both economic and social transformations from a vantage point that rarely touched the public domain. Typically, men and women in this circle dealt in declarations, delivering or refusing demands. They saw the world as a game board, each move carefully orchestrated. Yet they had never truly negotiated with someone who specialized in the power of quiet influence. They likely believed they could fold him into their ranks or use him as another piece in their elaborate schemes. He had no intention of letting that happen. A wealthy industrialist, silver-haired and sporting a refined accent, spoke next. "We know your track record, Mr. Trump. You have a knack for orchestrating solutions, forging alliances in calm, almost invisible ways. That's a talent we can use. We're facing potential crises in multiple regions, unrest driven by disparities in resource allocation. We'd like you to persuade certain stakeholders to align with our proposed frameworks for stabilizing these markets." Barron inclined his head just enough to show he was listening. "I see. And how exactly do you propose we proceed?" A faint grin curved the media mogul's lips. "We'll supply the big picture, which markets need calming, which public narratives need massaging. You'll handle the delicate persuasion behind the scenes, speaking with union leaders, local authorities, perhaps financing certain local initiatives. In return, we ensure your ventures are well supported. Think of it as a synergy. We maintain stability, you expand your influence, and everyone benefits." The unspoken meaning: help them retain control of global developments, and in exchange, he'd secure certain privileges for his own projects. The entire conversation was couched in polite language, but it essentially boiled down to a clandestine manipulation of world affairs for their collective gain. The older senator added, "We must do this quietly. Publicly, we want the image of free markets and democratic processes. But behind closed doors, we coordinate to avoid the unpredictability of letting events run their natural course." Barron steepled his fingers, letting the hush extend. He sensed they were testing him, gauging if he'd jump at the chance to be part of an exclusive power circle. Or if he'd recoil. While he disliked the notion of orchestrated illusions, he also recognized that some measure of behind-the-scenes coordination often prevented catastrophic meltdowns. There was a balance to be found, one that served not just the wealthy but also the broader population, if done ethically. But he doubted these titans thought much about ethical lines. Their track record suggested they valued control above all else. He took a measured breath. "I understand your desire for stability and coordination. But I also know that communities and nations can't thrive when they feel manipulated or left in the dark. My approach has always been about transparent listening, letting voices be heard, finding consensus that respects real needs. If you intend to maintain illusions or bury entire populations' concerns, I'm not your man." A mild ripple of surprise crossed some faces around the table. The finance magnate gave a cool stare. "We're not burying concerns. We're simply ensuring events proceed without the chaos that inevitably arises when too many uneducated voices weigh in." Barron's eyes narrowed slightly. "And who decides which voices are too uneducated?" "In my experience, ignoring those voices only leads to bigger explosions later. True stability arises when you harness every perspective, letting them shape policies that can stand on their own merit." The senator tapped her manicured nails on the table. "A noble sentiment, but also naive. We don't have the luxury of waiting for consensus. Economies can crash in weeks if fear runs rampant. We must shape outcomes swiftly. People want illusions of choice more than real choice, anyway." He recognized the cynicism behind her words. This was the fundamental tension: the titans believed in orchestrating illusions for the sake of stability, while he believed in harnessing genuine dialogue for sustainable solutions. Typically, illusions provided short-term calm, but illusions also concealed rot that eventually manifested in more destructive ways. They hadn't invited him to rewrite their approach, they wanted him to facilitate it. He leaned forward slightly. "If you've called me here expecting me to run your illusions, you've made a mistake. I don't do illusions. But if your goal is genuine stability that addresses deeper issues, rather than just burying them, I can help you design frameworks that bring real alignment. That might mean more openness than you're used to." The media mogul exchanged glances with the industrialist, a hint of tension in their faces. The finance magnate cleared his throat. "We must be realistic. Full transparency leads to mobs, populist uprisings, incompetent interference. We're dealing with macro-level complexities the average citizen cannot grasp. Barron's gaze sharpened. I disagree. People can grasp complexities if given the context. The question is whether you're willing to put in the effort to engage them. Or do you fear losing your grip? Silence stretched. Here, behind closed doors, it was rare for anyone to challenge them so directly. Typically, participants jockeyed for favor, never daring to openly question the entire premise. Yet Barron's calm defiance commanded a certain respect. The senator's expression hardened, but the corners of her mouth curled in a faint, grudging admiration. She spoke again, her voice tempered. How do you envision this working, then? You want to champion a more open approach. Do you expect us to host town halls on global resource distribution? The masses can be manipulated by demagogues. He shook his head. I'm not proposing chaos. I'm suggesting that the real route to lasting stability is listening, adapting, and forging authentic partnerships with local communities. Yes, it's slower at first, but the payoff is resilience. If you keep orchestrating illusions, you might stave off immediate crisis, but you sow seeds of distrust that eventually sprout revolt. History bears this out time after time. The industrialist, who had been quiet, spoke up. Barron, suppose we accept your premise for a moment. We shift from illusions to genuine dialogue. How do we ensure that dissenting voices don't sabotage progress? People can be irrational, especially when motivated by fear or prejudice. Barron exhaled slowly. The best antidote to irrational fear is factual transparency and consistent engagement. By showing that decisions aren't made in smoky backrooms but with input from local stakeholders, you dismantle the breeding ground for conspiracy. Yes, it requires more effort, more willingness to compromise, but once people see that their voices shape policy, they become invested in stability themselves. A slow nod from the senator indicated she recognized the logic. And how do we keep momentum when the economy wavers, or a crisis demands immediate action, leaving no time for extended deliberations? In times of crisis, he answered quietly, a foundation of trust built through prior transparency ensures that urgent measures can be implemented without revolt. People are more likely to follow emergency directives if they trust the system. That trust is earned in the quieter moments, not conjured in panic. They all sat in reflective silence for a moment. The lights in the salon glowed softly on the polished table, the hush almost reverent. Typically, these gatherings ended with demands, lines in the sand. Yet here they found themselves contemplating a different path, urged along not by a forceful voice but by the power of calm persuasion. The media mogul finally broke the lull. You paint a picture that some might call idealistic, but I see the strategic value. If an engaged public invests in our frameworks, we get less pushback, fewer public relations disasters. Maybe that's worth exploring. The finance magnate, arms folded, remained cautious. Even if we try your approach, we risk losing control. We prefer ensuring outcomes, not waiting for them to emerge from nebulous dialogues. Barron's voice softened further. Control can be an illusion, too. If you think you control everything but ignore the undercurrents, you become blindsided when they emerge. Real control might lie in harnessing, not suppressing, the collective will. People can sense authenticity. If your control is built on deception, it's a house of cards. The older senator cleared her throat. We might want to test this method in a less volatile region first. Show that it can yield results. If it stabilizes a smaller conflict, we can scale it. That might be the compromise. We partially adopt your transparent listening approach while maintaining certain oversight to avoid meltdown. Barron smiled mildly. That's a start. I'm not naive, not everything can be aired openly. Some negotiations require closed doors. But we can shift from illusions to respectful engagement. Let me demonstrate on a specific scenario. Then judge the results for yourself. And so the night wore on. Instead of the usual quick deals hammered out by those seeking to manipulate markets from the shadows, they engaged in a protracted conversation about pilot programs, about bridging local voices with top-down coordination. They debated whether to risk partial reveals of their role or maintain plausible deniability. Some of them had never entertained such discussion, preferring the old ways. But Barron's unyielding calm chipped away at their cynicism. He pressed for sincerity, for a rethinking of their deeply held belief that secrecy must overshadow truth. The conversation ebbed and flowed, sometimes drifting to historical parallels. They spoke of times when illusions had collapsed spectacularly, times when people turned violent after discovering hidden agendas. The patterns were clear. Perhaps the profit of illusions was overshadowed by the cost of eventual backlash. Hours later, the group reached a tentative agreement to pilot a more transparent mediation in a mid-sized region grappling with resource distribution and labor unrest. They would allow Barron to facilitate open dialogues with local unions, small business owners, and community leaders, with minimal behind-the-curtain machinations. The Titans insisted on monitoring the process, ensuring no meltdown occurred. Barron, in turn, insisted on ample time to engage all stakeholders genuinely. A fragile trust formed among them. They didn't fully relinquish their old instincts, but they had begun to consider a new path. As the meeting wound down, the senator approached Barron. A flicker of curiosity lit her steely eyes. "I must admit, your approach intrigues me. A part of me remains doubtful that the masses can handle nuance. But you project such calm, as though you truly believe in it. What made you certain that illusions do more harm than good?" His answer was quiet, "I've seen illusions crumble. I've watched entire populations scorn leaders who once seemed invincible when the truth surfaced. I've lived through controversies where quiet listening yielded better outcomes than any grand deception could. In my experience, illusions buy time, but not loyalty. Eventually, people feel betrayed if they discover they were manipulated. And that betrayal is far more dangerous than any short-term inconvenience caused by transparency." She nodded slowly, a grudging respect in her expression. "Perhaps we'll see if your logic holds under real pressure. Times are uncertain, and people crave stability, sometimes more than they crave truth." Barron gave a slight shrug. "Then let them see that truth can bring stability if guided with empathy. We can still manage crises, but with an honest foundation, we build resilience that illusions can't replicate." She gave him a final, thoughtful look, as though re-evaluating everything she knew about power. Then she turned away, leaving him to gather his things. The heavy oak door opened, and the Titans filed out into the corridor, each lost in private considerations. Some debated among themselves in hushed voices, perhaps deciding how best to implement or sabotage this new approach. Others walked quietly, as if absorbing the night's revelations. Lyle rejoined Barron, the two heading toward the exit. "That went, unexpectedly well," Lyle murmured. "I fully expected them to dismiss you or try to co-opt you for illusions. Instead, they might actually give your method a try." Barron nodded, casting a final glance back at the now-dim salon. "I don't pretend they're fully convinced. But a crack has formed in their old system. If they see results, that crack might widen." They continued down the mansion's hallway, footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The hush enveloped them once again, an almost sacred quiet in a place where so many clandestine deals had shaped the world's fortunes. Outside, the night air felt cool and refreshing. Overhead, a canopy of stars shimmered, far removed from the intrigues of powerful people. Barron paused on the mansion's broad steps, inhaling deeply as if to cleanse himself of the tension. Lyle signaled their driver. The car pulled up, headlights cutting through the darkness. Before getting in, Barron found himself reflecting on the paradox that had just occurred. Behind closed doors, he urged the dismantling of illusions rather than forging new ones. These so-called titans, used to orchestrating illusions to preserve control, had at least opened a door to a path of measured transparency. "Do you think they'll sabotage the pilot project once it challenges their comfort zone?" Lyle asked softly as they settled into the back seat. Barron gazed out the window while the car pulled away from the mansion's gates. Possibly, he answered in that reserved voice of his. But even if they do, we'll have shown that there is another way. Seeds of doubt and illusions have been planted. Sometimes that alone can shift the future. They drove through quiet streets, passing grand facades that hid countless secrets. Lyle took notes on a tablet, recording next steps. They'd have to organize the mediation in the target region, contact local leaders, and set up the framework for genuine dialogue. And all the while, they'd have to keep the Titans informed, ensuring they didn't panic and revert to their old manipulative habits. The task would be delicate, the margin of error small. But that was Barron's strength, turning tightropes into pathways, so long as he walked them calmly and with unwavering resolve. By the time they reached Barron's own residence, the first hints of dawn streaked the horizon. He stepped out of the car, feeling the weight of what lay ahead, but also a quiet confidence. The night's conversation behind closed doors had proven that even the most entrenched power brokers could be nudged to consider an alternative if addressed with composure and conviction. Perhaps illusions would not vanish overnight, but he had planted the idea that illusions might be replaced by real engagement. And once an idea takes root among those with the capacity to implement it, changes can emerge in ways unseen at first. Slipping inside, Barron moved through softly lit corridors until he reached a private study. There, he poured himself a glass of water, thinking about the upcoming months. A pilot program to coordinate stakeholders openly would be a small step, but a significant one. If it succeeded, it could become the blueprint for dealing with future crises. If it failed, the Titans might double down on illusions and covert manipulation. Nonetheless, he believed the effort worth any risk. He had always maintained that quiet determination could unravel the most rigid structures, if given time. He sipped the water, letting the tension of the night drain from him. The city outside began to stir, the sky lightening inch by inch. Soon he would rest, then awaken to begin orchestrating the next phase of the plan, bridging the gap between monolithic power and grassroots reality. In those private moments, he reminded himself that transformations often begin quietly, behind closed doors, in the hush of sincerity between those unaccustomed to hearing truths. One step at a time, illusions could be stripped away, replaced by a more honest foundation for collaboration. As the dawn finally broke, Barron set the empty glass down on a sleek side table, feeling both the gravity and the hope of what had transpired. For all the deals struck behind that oak door, for all the hidden manipulations that had shaped nations, tonight he had introduced something new, an invitation to pivot from illusions to authentic listening, from the tyranny of controlled narratives to the steady resilience of truth. And in that silent moment, as the first rays of daylight crept into the room, he felt certain that even the quietest step in the right direction was worth taking.